The Rhine River offered one of the last major barriers to the heartland of Germany. Across this river was the Ruhr Valley area that contained a heavy concentration of industry that supported the German war effort. Even though this area had been bombed repeatedly, it was still productive, and as always, it would be necessary to go in with ground troops to secure the area, village by village and house by house. It was decided that the Rhine River crossing would be made in all areas at the same time, with the exception of several miles in the Ruhr Valley that was heavily fortified. Massive crossings were to be made north and south of this area, and then join up at some distance from the river in a pincer's section, encircling the Ruhr Valley and eventually squeezing it into submission. History records that this maneuver did go as planned and resulted in the eventual capture of this industrialized area. In preparation for the crossing, troops were moved into position by night to within a few miles from the river, with orders to dig in and stay concealed. This troop movement took place over a period of several weeks. I was in this troop movement as a member of I Company, 119th Regiment, 30th Infantry Division. Thousands of infantrymen from dozens of units were lined up almost shoulder to shoulder for over 500 miles along the Rhine River while we waited for the word to cross. Also, over this entire distance, artillery units were in place behind us and lobbed shells over our position into the opposite bank of the river for days on end. On top of all of this, huge smoke generators were brought into position, and for days the entire length of the Rhine was under the biggest smoke screen in history, concealing the preparations being made by the Allied troops. The Army engineers had moved into position with their road building and bridge building equipment. All kinds of support material and equipment was moved into position for the big crossing. Finally, one night after dark, we were ordered to start moving. This was in the spring of 1945. I believe it was in the month of March. Before we left our positions, we were issued white armbands and were told to put them on our left arm for identification. After about 2 hours of marching, we were halted a few hundred yards from the river, and only then it was explained to us how the crossing would be made. We would be in the first wave across, and nearby was our method of travel. It was a small plywood boat about 5 feet wide and about 7 or 8 feet long with maybe 15-inch sides. It was built about like a horse trough, except it was curved upward on the front. Attached to it was what was said to be a 50-horsepower outboard motor. It seemed like an awful lot of power for such a small boat, but we would soon appreciate the power. We were told that 7 fully equipped infantrymen plus the boat operator would make the crossing in this small boat. Up and down the river, these small craft would be taking the first wave of troops to the opposite bank. They were called storm boats. The second wave would cross in assault boats. They were 12 or 14-foot long John boats or river boats and carried about 12 men. Following these would be ducks or amphibious trucks, and then alligators, which are amphibious tracked personnel carriers. Next would be LCVPs, that's landing craft vehicle personnel, and could carry troops and light vehicles. Then came LCTs. These were huge landing craft that were hauled overland across Europe and were manned about 4-man Navy crews. If all went well, which for the most part it did, these craft would be putting tanks across the river by daylight. Now the time was at hand to start one of the biggest coordinated assaults in military history. For hundreds of miles along the river, the crossing got underway. The last minute before moving out, we changed the white armbands from the left arm to the right arm, with orders to shoot anybody on the other side of the river but had them on the left arm. This was done in an effort to prevent infiltration of our troops by the Germans. They were very good at this, as we learned in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. Our small storm boats had handles on the side, and with 3 men on each side, the Kraut was easily slid up over the levee that was along the river and then down to the water. As soon as we stepped in the boat, the motors were cranked by the boat operator, and even though the river was very wide here, we made a quick, uneventful ride to the opposite bank. We hit the shore at full speed and slid almost to the levee top before coming to a stop. We had crossed in a fairly remote area, and even though we could hear a firefight on our flank, we were not directly under fire. We soon found out why. We were in the middle of a minefield. We had been told to expect anti-personnel mines, and we had men that were trained for just such a situation. I didn't envy them their jobs. They used detectors to locate the mines. No effort was made at this time to remove or disarm the mines. They were located, and white luminous tape was used to mark a trail that we could follow to travel single file through the field. Just as we got through the mined area and came to a main road, we heard what sounded like a man moaning nearby, and we cautiously went to investigate. We found a German soldier, but apparently did not know the location of the minefield and had wandered into it and had set off one of the mines. This had undoubtedly happened before we had crossed the river. This particular type of mine bounces into the air when activated and then explodes, sending shrapnel in all directions. In this case, the shrapnel had ripped open his stomach and his intestines were laying on the ground. He begged us for help, and as we explained to him as best we could that we could not do anything for him, then we turned to leave, and he begged us to shoot him to get him out of his misery. As we moved out of hearing down the road, he was cursing us because we wouldn't kill him. Our objective for the first day was to occupy a small town about a mile inland from the river. And even after being slowed down some by the minefield, it looked like we would be on schedule. But just as it seemed we would occupy the town with only light opposition, we came under heavy fire from the edge of town. Daylight found the battle going fast and furious, but since both sides had moved into cellars and the buildings, and a lot of damage was being inflicted on one another. Finally, it dawned on us that we were fighting a battalion of our own unit, and since we had lost our radio man somewhere along the way, we could not convince them that we were on their side. On top of this, our tanks had crossed the river and were slowly moving up the road in our direction, and since we were not in communication and the other side or the other unit was, you just know whose side they'd be on. Just as the tanks were moving into position to wipe us out, our radio man showed up, and after some fast talking and signs and countersigns and passwords and all that kind of stuff, we were finally accepted as being friendly. After regrouping, we were on the move again, and indications were that this might be the last big push in the defeat of Nazi Germany. It was about this time that we started something fairly new in military tactics. We, as infantry troops, joined forces with elements of the 2nd Armored Division. A group of 4 or 5 men would be assigned to each tank of the armored unit. We would ride on the outside of the tanks and go barreling down the road until we came under fire. And at this time would usually be a sniper or a machine gun nest, or a small unit trying to defend a town or other strategic position. It was much easier to locate these positions from outside the tanks as we were, and then by using the intercom system that allowed us to communicate with the tank crew, and by using tracer ammunition, we could pinpoint the enemy position, and the tanks with their 75mm howitzers and 90mm rifles could make short work of them.